The pool shimmered like polished glass under the afternoon sun, surrounded by marble tiles, designer shoes, and people who had never been told no. Laughter floated easily through the air, the kind that came from comfort, not joy. This was a place built for winners, for families whose names were engraved on buildings, not written on lunchboxes. Near the edge of the pool stood a small boy, no more than 10. His shoulders were stiff. His fingers twitched at his sides, opening and closing as if he were trying to hold the world still. The noise was too loud, the light too sharp, the water reflected in fractured patterns that made his chest tighten. He rocked gently, eyes locked on the ground, praying no one would notice him. But they always noticed the quiet ones. A group of teens hovered nearby, confident, careless, cruel in the way only protected people can be. One of them stepped forward, tall, smiling, with a kind of grin that didn't reach the eyes. He said something that made the others laugh. The boy didn't respond. He couldn't. His silence only fueled them. Across the courtyard, a black teenage girl in a simple uniform paused mid-step, a serving tray balanced in her hands. She hadn't been listening to the laughter, she had been watching the boy. The way his breathing changed, the way his body stiffened, the way no adult seemed to be moving closer. Then it happened. A sudden shove, a sharp gasp from the crowd, and the boy disappeared into the pool. Water exploded upward. Screams followed, some shocked, some amused, most frozen in disbelief. The boy thrashed, panic taking over as the noise became unbearable, the water unbearable, his body betraying him. Adults stood still, calculating consequences. Phones were already coming out. The girl dropped the tray. It hit the ground with a hollow clatter, echoing louder than the laughter ever had. She didn't ask permission. She didn't look around. She ran straight toward the pool, straight toward a moment that would cost her more than anyone realized. Because what they didn't know, what no one there understood yet, was that the next thing she would do wouldn't just save a life. It would expose a lie. It would break a system. And it would change every single person standing by that pool forever. Aaliyah Carter had learned early how to exist without being seen. At 16, she moved through the world quietly, not because she lacked a voice, but because experience had taught her when voices were welcomed and when they were punished. She lived with her mother in a small apartment on the edge of the city, where the walls were thin, the bills were thick, and love was the one thing that never ran out. Her mother worked long hours, sometimes double shifts, yet still found time to sit with Aaliyah at night, reminding her of one rule she never let go of. Never let this world teach you to be cruel just because it's powerful. That rule followed Aaliyah everywhere, including today. The private academy grounds felt like another universe. Perfect lawns, white stone paths, buildings named after donors who never set foot in a classroom. Today's fundraiser had drawn the city's elite, business leaders, politicians, legacy families. This was a place where money spoke softly but carried authority, where mistakes were erased, not corrected. Aaliyah and her mother were there as staff, not guests. Their uniforms were clean but plain, a visual reminder of where they belonged in this ecosystem. She carried trays, smiled politely, and stayed out of the way, aware that one wrong step could mean losing the small opportunities she was fighting for. Her scholarship application depended on recommendations from people who valued obedience more than courage. Still, Aaliyah watched, she always did. That's how she noticed the boy. Ethan Whitmore stood apart from the crowd, close enough to be included, far enough to be ignored. He was small for his age, with careful movements and eyes that absorbed too much at once. His world was loud in ways no one else could hear. The chatter echoed too sharply. The splashing water felt threatening even before it touched him. He pressed his hands together, grounding himself, repeating silent rhythms he'd learned in therapy. Ethan wasn't fragile, he was overwhelmed. His autism wasn't something people here tried to understand. It was something they tolerated quietly, uncomfortably, as long as it didn't disrupt the image. He was known as the billionaire's son, but rarely treated like a child. His father's wealth cast a long shadow, yet somehow left Ethan standing alone in it. Richard Whitmore wasn't absent out of cruelty. He was absent out of fear. Since Ethan's mother passed away years earlier, Richard had buried himself in work, convincing himself that providing everything money could buy was enough. He loved his son deeply, but from a distance. Today, he wasn't at the pool. He was in a glass office miles away, trusting the school, the staff, the system he funded to protect what mattered most. Back at the academy, the social order was clear. Kids like Trent Holloway moved freely, laughing loudly, pushing boundaries without consequences. His family's donations had built a wing of the school. Teachers looked the other way when he crossed lines. Other students followed him, not because he was admired, but because he was untouchable. And then there was Aaliyah, standing between worlds. She noticed Ethan's discomfort long before anyone else did. The way his breathing changed when the music grew louder. The way he flinched when someone brushed past him. At one point, when no one was watching, she gently slowed her steps near him, lowering her voice as she passed, offering a calm presence without intrusion. Ethan didn't look up, but his shoulders eased just slightly. That moment mattered more than either of them knew. The tension had been building long before the shove. It lived in the way the teens whispered, in the glances exchanged when Ethan didn't respond fast enough, in the adults who noticed but chose not to intervene. The unspoken rule was simple: don't make things uncomfortable, especially not here. Aaliyah felt it in her chest, that familiar pressure that came right before something went wrong. She'd felt it before, in classrooms where teachers ignored raised hands like hers, in stores where security followed her mother for no reason, in rooms where silence protected the powerful. She didn't know why she was watching the boy so closely. Maybe because she recognized that kind of loneliness. Maybe because she understood what it meant to exist in a space that wasn't built for you. Or maybe because some part of her already knew this day wasn't going to end quietly. As laughter grew louder near the pool, Aaliyah tightened her grip on the tray. She told herself to stay focused, to stay invisible, to remember what was at stake. But the world was already shifting, and none of them realized yet that the fragile balance holding everything together, money, privilege, silence, was seconds away from breaking. The moment didn't explode all at once. It crept forward, quiet and disguised as normal. Laughter rolled across the pool deck, light and careless, mixing with the soft splash of water and the clink of glasses. To most people, it sounded like celebration. To Ethan, it felt like pressure building behind his eyes. Each sound landed a fraction too loud, too sharp, stacking on top of the last until his chest tightened. He stood near the pool's edge, toes angled inward, counting his breaths the way his therapist had taught him. In for 4. Hold, out for 6. It wasn't working. The sun reflected off the water in broken flashes, stabbing his vision. His hands fluttered, fingers brushing his palms, searching for something solid. He wanted to leave, but he didn't know how without drawing attention. Leaving meant questions. Questions meant noise. Noise meant panic. So he stayed still. That's when Trent noticed him. Trent Holloway had the kind of awareness that came from growing up untouchable. He could sense vulnerability the way sharks sensed blood. He didn't see Ethan as a child struggling to regulate his body. He saw an interruption, an oddity, something out of place at his school, his event. Trent leaned toward his friends, murmuring something under his breath. Smiles spread. A couple of them glanced at Ethan, then back at Trent, already entertained. One girl covered her mouth, pretending to be shocked while laughing anyway. "Yo," Trent said, stepping closer, voice loud enough to carry. "You okay, man?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. Words felt locked behind glass. Trent tilted his head, exaggerated concern dripping with mockery. "Hey, I asked you something." Still nothing. A few people nearby glanced over, then quickly looked away. Adults noticed the cluster forming but didn't move. They trusted the unspoken hierarchy. Kids like Trent didn't cause real trouble, not the kind that needed intervention. Across the courtyard, Aaliyah felt the shift before she saw it. Her body recognized the pattern, the tightening air, the way laughter sharpened into something else. She turned slightly, tray balanced on her forearm, eyes scanning until she found the source. The boy by the pool, the teens closing in, the familiar shape of cruelty wearing a casual smile. Her heart thudded once hard. She told herself not to stare, not to get involved. She'd been warned already that day, quiet reminders from supervisors to stay focused and avoid guests. This place wasn't forgiving. One complaint could undo months of effort. But her feet slowed anyway. Trent took another step closer to Ethan, invading his space. "You scared of the water or something?" he said, chuckling. "It's just a pool." Ethan's breathing broke rhythm. His hands flew up to cover his ears as the sounds collided, laughter, splashing music, Trent's voice cutting through it all. His knees trembled. Aaliyah's grip tightened on the tray. She saw it then clear as day, not just discomfort, not awkwardness, fear. "Hey," one of Trent's friends said, nudging him. Leave him alone. But his tone wasn't serious. It was performative, a line spoken just in case someone important was listening. Trent smirked. Relax, I'm just trying to help him have fun. He reached out. Not violently, not yet. Just enough to make contact, a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan flinched like he'd been burned. The reaction set something off. Laughter spiked. Someone whistled. Phones lifted, subtle but ready. That was when Aaliyah took a step forward. She didn't say anything. She didn't shout. She simply moved closer to the pool, eyes locked on the scene, every instinct screaming that time was running out. "Don't touch me," Ethan whispered. The words were barely audible, fragile, desperate. Trent raised his eyebrows. See, he talks. And then, with a suddenness that shattered the moment open, Trent shoved him. It wasn't a dramatic push. It didn't look brutal at first glance. That's what made it worse. A small, careless motion, the kind people dismissed as horseplay. Ethan lost his balance instantly. His heel slipped on the wet tile. His arms flailed, grasping at air that offered no resistance. The world tipped, sunlight and faces blurring into chaos as gravity took over. He fell backward into the pool. The splash was violent. Water surged over the edge, soaking shoes, dresses, polished stone. A sharp collective gasp cut through the noise, followed by scattered laughter that died too slowly. Ethan went under. The shock of the water hit him like an attack. Cold, loud, inescapable, every sense screamed at once. He kicked, thrashed, mouth opening in a silent cry as water rushed in. His body didn't understand this environment, couldn't organize itself fast enough to respond. He wasn't swimming. He was drowning. For a second, just one, no one moved. Adults stared, frozen between concern and calculation. Was this serious? Should someone intervene? Who would be responsible if they did? The seconds stretched, thick and heavy. Aaliyah didn't wait for permission. She dropped the tray. The metal crashed against the stone, plates shattering, the sound sharp enough to turn heads. But she was already running. Her shoes slipped off as she reached the pool's edge. She dove in without hesitation, clothes and all, cutting through the water toward Ethan. The cold wrapped around her, shocking but manageable. She'd grown up around public pools. She knew water. More importantly, she knew panic. She reached Ethan within seconds, placing herself between him and the chaos. She didn't grab him roughly. She didn't shout. She met his eyes, steady, grounding. "Look at me," she said calmly. "You're okay, I've got you." Her voice was low, controlled, cutting through the noise like a lifeline. Ethan's flailing slowed, just enough. Aaliyah guided his hands to the pool edge, helping him feel the solid surface. "Hold here," she instructed gently. "That's it, you're safe." With effort, they reached the steps. She stayed close, shielding him from the crowd, from the cameras, from the shock still rippling outward. By the time they emerged, dripping and shaking, the moment had already begun to change shape. Whispers turned sharp, people murmured, some looked impressed, others annoyed. A staff member rushed over, not to Ethan, but to Aaliyah. "What do you think you're doing?" the woman snapped. "You can't just jump into the pool." Aaliyah stared at her, stunned. He was drowning. "We have lifeguards for that," the woman replied tightly, though none had moved. Trent stood back, arms crossed, wearing a look of exaggerated innocence. "It was an accident," he said. He slipped. Ethan clung to the rail, shaking, unable to speak. Aaliyah felt something crack open inside her chest. She realized in that moment that saving him was only the beginning. The water kept dripping from Aaliyah's sleeves, pooling at her feet, but no one seemed to notice. All eyes were fixed on her, not with gratitude, not with relief, but with the sharp curiosity reserved for people who break unspoken rules. Ethan clutched the metal railing, his knuckles pale, chest rising in shallow, uneven bursts. His gaze darted everywhere except at the crowd. Every sound hit him too hard now, the murmurs, the questions, the shifting feet. Aaliyah stayed close, angling her body slightly in front of him, instinctively creating a barrier between him and the world. The staff member who had scolded her cleared her throat, visibly recalibrating as more adults gathered. "Everyone, please," she said, forcing a polite smile. "Let's calm down. There's no need to make this into a scene." A scene? The word landed like an accusation. Aaliyah opened her mouth to respond, but another voice cut in first. "Is he okay?" a woman asked, stepping forward in heels that clicked sharply against the stone. Her concern sounded genuine but distant, like something practiced. "He'll be fine," Trent said quickly. "He just panicked." Aaliyah turned toward him, water still dripping from her braids. "He didn't panic," she said, her voice steady but loud enough to carry. "He was pushed." The courtyard went still. Not silent but watchful. Trent's smile twitched. "What?" "You pushed him," Aaliyah repeated. "I saw it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces shifted, uncomfortable. Others hardened. Trent laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "Why would I do that?" Aaliyah met his eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step closer. She simply refused to look away. "Because you thought it was funny." A teacher moved quickly between them, hands raised in a calming gesture. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said, his tone measured. "Accusations like that are serious." "So is drowning," Aaliyah replied. The teacher frowned. "Young lady, I don't think you understand." "I understand exactly what I saw." Behind them, Ethan's breathing spiked again. The tension, the confrontation, the sudden focus. It was all too much. He pressed his hands to his ears, rocking slightly, eyes squeezed shut. Aaliyah noticed instantly. She shifted her attention back to him, lowering her voice. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're out now, you're safe." But the adults were already deciding what the story would be. A security guard approached, posture stiff. "We're going to need everyone to step back," he said, eyes landing on Aaliyah first. "Including you." "Why?" she asked. "You disrupted a private event," the guard replied, "and you entered the pool without authorization." Aaliyah stared at him, incredulous. He was drowning. The guard didn't respond. He didn't need to. The hierarchy had spoken for him. Trent's mother appeared at his side, manicured hand resting possessively on his shoulder. "This is ridiculous," she said coolly. "My son would never hurt anyone." Trent leaned into her touch, confidence restored. "I was just trying to joke around." Aaliyah felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, not from exhaustion, but from realization. This wasn't about truth. It never had been. A staff member wrapped a towel around Ethan's shoulders, ushering him away without meeting his eyes. "Let's get you inside," she said brightly, as if this were a minor inconvenience. "We'll call your father." Ethan glanced back once, eyes searching the crowd until they landed on Aaliyah. His fingers tightened around the towel. She gave him a small nod, a promise without words. As he was led away, the energy shifted again. The urgency drained. People began returning to their conversations, already reshaping the moment into something easier to digest. An accident, a misunderstanding, nothing worth lingering on. Except for Aaliyah. A supervisor pulled her aside, voice low and tight. "You can't do that again." "Do what?" Aaliyah asked. "Cause problems," the woman said. "This school is very particular about appearances. You embarrassed us." Aaliyah felt heat rise in her chest. A child almost drowned. "And you made it worse by drawing attention," the supervisor snapped. "You're here to work, not to intervene." Aaliyah stared at her, stunned by the ease with which compassion had been reframed as misconduct. "You should be grateful," the woman continued. "Any complaints from our donors could affect your future, your scholarship application, for instance." The words were quiet, but the threat was unmistakable. Across the courtyard, Trent caught Aaliyah's eye and smirked. That was the moment something hardened inside her. Not anger, resolve. "I won't apologize," Aaliyah said calmly. The supervisor's eyes widened. "Excuse me." "I won't apologize for saving him." The woman inhaled sharply, then straightened. "We'll discuss this later." As she walked away, Aaliyah stood alone on the wet stone, soaked, heart-pounding. Around her, the fundraiser resumed its polished rhythm. Glasses clinked. Laughter returned. The pool shimmered again, hiding what had happened beneath its surface. But elsewhere, the moment was replaying. In a quiet office miles away, Richard Whitmore sat frozen in front of a monitor. The security feed had no sound, but it didn't need it. He watched his son's body hit the water, watched the hesitation, watched the crowd do nothing. Then he watched the girl run. He rewound it once, then again. He saw how she entered the water without pause, how she didn't thrash or panic, how she positioned herself in front of Ethan, steady and deliberate, how the adults spoke to her afterward, sharp, dismissive, while the boy who'd pushed his son stood untouched. Richard's jaw tightened. Back at the academy, Aaliyah finished her shift in silence. Her clothes dried stiff against her skin. No one thanked her. No one asked if she was okay. When she and her mother left, the sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows across the grounds. In the car, her mother glanced at her. "You're quiet." Aaliyah stared out the window. "I did the right thing," she said. Her mother nodded slowly. "I know. But it might cost us." Her mother's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Some things are worth the cost." That night, Ethan sat wrapped in blankets, staring at the bathroom door where the sound of running water echoed faintly from the pipes. His hands trembled. His chest felt tight. But when he closed his eyes, he didn't see the pool. He saw Aaliyah, standing between him and the noise, between him and the water, between him and a world that hadn't protected him. And for the first time since the accident, his breathing slowed. By morning, the incident had already been rewritten in whispers and emails. Unfortunate accident, no malicious intent, handled internally. But somewhere beneath the carefully crafted language, a crack had formed. Because Aaliyah hadn't just pulled a child from the water. She had stepped into a truth the system couldn't fully bury. And from that moment on, nothing, not the school, not the families, not the billionaire watching from afar, would be able to pretend this was just a simple accident ever again. The days after the fundraiser felt heavier than the moment itself. At school, the story had already been smoothed into something harmless. Teachers spoke of a misunderstanding near the pool. Emails went out to parents praising the staff for their swift response. The word pushed never appeared. Neither did fear or silence or the long seconds when a child had been left alone in the water. Aaliyah felt the shift immediately. Hallways that once ignored her now watched her. Some students stared with curiosity, others with irritation, as if she had broken an unspoken agreement to stay in her place. A few whispered her name. Most didn't bother lowering their voices. "That's the girl from the pool." She jumped in like she owned the place. "She's trying to get attention." Aaliyah kept her head down, but each step felt louder than the last. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, not questioning what she'd done, but wondering how easily the truth had been bent around it. The school bell rang, lockers slammed, life moved forward as if nothing had happened. That, somehow, felt worse than open hostility. In class, teachers avoided eye contact. When discussions turned to safety or responsibility, they moved on too quickly, afraid of where honesty might lead. Aaliyah's hand hovered in the air once, then slowly dropped. She understood the message. Silence was preferred. Trent Holloway, meanwhile, walked through campus untouched. He laughed in class, high-fived friends. Teachers greeted him with the same indulgent smiles as always. When Aaliyah passed him in the corridor, he leaned toward his friends and said something that made them snicker. He didn't look guilty. He looked entertained. That bothered her more than anger ever could. One afternoon, she overheard two staff members speaking in hushed tones near the faculty room. "We can't afford another incident," one said, "especially with donors watching." The other nodded. "Better to let it fade." Let it fade. At home, the weight followed her. Her mother noticed the tension immediately. The way Aaliyah moved more carefully, the way she paused before answering simple questions, the way she stared too long at nothing. Over dinner, the news played softly in the background, a segment about private schools and donor funding slipping by unnoticed. "They called today," her mother said finally. Aaliyah looked up. "Who?" "The academy," she hesitated. "They asked for a meeting." Aaliyah's stomach tightened. She already knew what it meant. Meetings were never just meetings in places like that. They were warnings dressed up as concern. "They said you acted outside your role," her mother continued. "That you caused unnecessary disruption." "And what about Ethan?" Aaliyah asked. Her mother sighed. "They said he was overwhelmed, that it was unfortunate." Unfortunate, the word tasted bitter. Aaliyah pushed her plate away. "They're pretending it didn't happen." Her mother studied her for a long moment. "They're hoping you'll let it go." Silence settled between them, heavy but familiar. Finally, her mother reached across the table. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "I'm proud of you." Across the city, Ethan sat curled on his bed, knees pulled to his chest. The house was quiet in the way only expensive homes could be. Thick walls, muted sounds, emptiness disguised as peace. A glass of water sat untouched on his desk. He hadn't gone near the pool since that day. He hadn't gone near water at all. His therapist spoke gently, encouraging small steps, but Ethan's body refused. At night, he dreamed of falling, of noise swallowing him whole. He woke up shaking, calling for someone who wasn't there. His father watched him from the doorway. Richard Whitmore felt something unfamiliar pressing against his ribs. Guilt, yes, but also anger. He'd built companies, negotiated deals, crushed opposition, yet he had trusted strangers to protect his son, and they had failed without hesitation. He remembered the footage. The hesitation, the stillness, the girl running. He replayed it again, slower this time. He noticed details he'd missed before, the way adults glanced at one another instead of acting, the way the boy who pushed Ethan never even reached for him afterward. And then there was Aaliyah, moving without fear, without calculation. Richard hadn't told anyone yet that he'd seen it. Not the school, not his lawyers. He needed to understand first who would speak the truth without knowing who he was. Back at the academy, the tension thickened. Aaliyah was called into the administration office during lunch. The walls were lined with plaques, awards, framed letters from donors. The principal folded her hands, voice calm, eyes sharp. "You put us in a difficult position," she said. "I saved a child," Aaliyah replied quietly. The principal smiled thinly. "Intentions aside, your behavior was inappropriate. You overstepped boundaries. By not letting him drown." Silence stretched. The principal's smile faded. "You need to think about your future," she said. "People talk, opportunities disappear." Aaliyah felt the pressure then, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy. The kind designed to make people choose comfort over conscience. She left the office with a formal warning and the clear understanding that she was being watched. Outside, Ethan's empty chair in class stayed empty. Rumors filled the space instead. Some said he was fragile. Others said he shouldn't be there at all. Aaliyah heard them and clenched her fists. One afternoon, as she waited for her bus, a familiar black car pulled up beside the curb. The window rolled down slowly, revealing a man in a tailored suit with tired eyes. "I'd like to talk," Richard Whitmore said. Aaliyah hesitated, then nodded, unaware of who he truly was. They sat on a bench near the street. He asked simple questions, why she jumped in, what she saw, what happened afterward. Aaliyah answered honestly, not knowing this quiet conversation was being weighed against millions of dollars and carefully protected reputations. When he left, she felt unsettled, as if a door had opened somewhere she couldn't see. She didn't know yet that this conversation would become the fault line the school could no longer control. But she could already feel it. The truth, once seen, was getting heavier. And it was no longer willing to stay buried. The following week, subtle consequences began to surface. Aaliyah's name was removed from a volunteer list. A teacher suggested she focus on less visible activities. Friends grew cautious, afraid association might cost them something. None of it was said outright. It didn't need to be. The message was clear. Survival here required cooperation. Yet every time Aaliyah considered backing down, she remembered Ethan's eyes in the water. The fear, the relief, the way his grip had tightened when adults failed him. That memory anchored her when doubt crept in. At home, her mother reviewed bills at the kitchen table, the calculator clicking softly. The scholarship mattered. It mattered more than pride, more than principle. Aaliyah understood that, but understanding didn't make the choice easier. Elsewhere, Richard Whitmore sat in meetings where people praised the academy's excellence. He listened, nodded, and said nothing. Each compliment felt hollow. He had begun asking quiet questions, requesting records, incident reports, internal communications. The answers came back polished, sanitized, incomplete. He recognized the pattern immediately. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a culture. A culture that protected itself first, even if a child paid the price. As pressure built on all sides, one truth became unavoidable. The incident by the pool was no longer just about what had happened. It was about who would be forced to carry the weight of it, and who would finally be made to answer for it. Aaliyah felt that question follow her everywhere, into classrooms, onto buses, into restless sleep. She didn't know how the story would end, only that it had already passed the point of return. The truth had weight now, and it was pressing down on everyone connected to that day. Some would try to outrun it. Some would try to bury it. And some, like Aaliyah, would learn just how heavy the cost of carrying it could be. The rising tension settled into her bones, steady and unrelenting, as the world around her braced for what would come next. Nothing felt accidental anymore, and every silence, every glance, every closed door hinted that the coming confrontation would demand courage from those who had spent their lives avoiding it, and reveal who they truly were at last. The pressure did not arrive all at once. It arrived in pieces, quiet and deliberate, like weight being added to a scale one coin at a time. Aaliyah felt it first in the pauses. Teachers paused before calling on her. Administrators paused before responding to her emails. Friends paused before sitting next to her, measuring the risk with their eyes. No one said she was in trouble. No one needed to. The message lived in what wasn't said, in the careful distance people kept, in the way her name carried an invisible warning. Trent, on the other hand, moved freely. He joked louder now, emboldened by the silence that protected him. When his friends laughed, it sounded sharper, more intentional. He had learned something important by the pool that day. Not that he was wrong, but that he was safe. One afternoon, as Aaliyah walked past the gym, she heard his voice behind her. "You really think you're a hero, don't you?" She stopped, slowly turned. Trent leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes amused. "Everyone's already forgotten," he continued. "You should too." Aaliyah met his gaze. "I'm not everyone." His smile faded for half a second. Then it returned, colder. "Careful," he said. "People like you don't win these things." "People like you." The words followed her long after he walked away. That evening, Aaliyah sat on her bed staring at the scholarship application portal on her laptop. The deadline blinked softly at the top of the screen. She had done everything right. Grades, recommendations, community service, all of it balanced on the approval of people who now avoided her eyes. Her mother knocked gently and stepped inside. "You haven't touched dinner." "I'm not hungry." Her mother sat beside her. "You don't regret it." Aaliyah shook her head. "I regret that it was necessary." Her mother nodded, understanding too well. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel right until much later. Across town, Ethan sat at the kitchen table while a therapist spoke calmly, guiding him through breathing exercises. His fingers trembled as he pressed them together, grounding himself. Water sat in a glass nearby, untouched but present. Progress was slow, painfully slow. Richard watched quietly from the hallway. He had canceled meetings, ignored calls. For the first time in years, nothing felt more important than being there. Later that night, Richard opened his laptop and began compiling everything. Footage, emails, reports. Each document told the same story in different words: liability management, reputation control, silence. He wondered how many times this had happened before. The next morning, Aaliyah was called into the counseling office. The counselor smiled too much, spoke too softly. "We're concerned about you," she said. "This attention can be stressful." Aaliyah listened carefully. Concern was never free in places like this. "Have you considered transferring?" the counselor asked gently. The question landed hard. "No," Aaliyah replied. "Well," the counselor said, folding her hands, "sometimes a fresh start is healthier for everyone." Aaliyah stood. "I didn't do anything wrong." The counselor sighed as if disappointed. "That depends on perspective." Perspective, another word used to blur truth. By the end of the week, the pressure spread beyond school. A local blog posted a vague article about staff misconduct at elite fundraiser. Comments filled quickly. Some praised the girl who jumped in. Others questioned her motives. The comments grew uglier by the hour. Aaliyah didn't read them. Her mother did and closed the laptop with shaking hands. "You're getting support," her mother said, "and hate." Aaliyah nodded. "I can handle it." But handling didn't mean untouched. One night, unable to sleep, Aaliyah replayed the moment again. Not the shove, not the water, the hesitation. The way adults had looked at one another instead of acting. That was what stayed with her. That was the real wound. At school, a mandatory assembly was announced. "Community values," the email said. Students gathered in the auditorium, murmuring. The principal spoke about unity, about respect, about moving forward. She never mentioned Ethan, never mentioned the pool. She spoke as if words alone could erase memory. Aaliyah sat still, hands clenched. After the assembly, Richard Whitmore stood at the back of the room, unnoticed by most. He watched the faces. He listened to the applause. He felt something settle inside him, heavy and immovable. Later that day, he requested a meeting with the board. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to school quietly, escorted, placed carefully in his seat like something fragile. Students glanced at him, then away. No one apologized. No one asked if he was okay. Except Aaliyah. She didn't approach him. She didn't speak. She simply met his eyes across the room and gave a small nod. Ethan nodded back. It was enough. That night, Richard sat with Ethan by the pool at their home. The water was still, quiet. Ethan stood at a distance, breathing shallowly. "You don't have to go in," Richard said softly. Ethan shook his head. "Not yet." "That's okay." They sat together, the silence different now. Not empty, shared. The following week, the school received a formal notice. An external review, funding temporarily paused, whispers spread fast, fear replaced comfort. Administrators scrambled, teachers whispered. Trent's confidence wavered for the first time. Aaliyah felt it too, the shift, the air thickening. She was called into the office again, this time with her mother present. Apologies were offered, words softened, offers appeared. "We value you," the principal said carefully. Aaliyah listened, then asked one question. "What about Ethan?" The room fell quiet. That question changed everything. Because now, the truth was no longer hers alone to carry. It had weight, and it was starting to crush the people who thought they could outrun it. The board meeting loomed, evidence stacked higher, stories aligned, silence cracked. Aaliyah walked home that day feeling something unfamiliar, not relief, not victory. Momentum. She didn't know what justice would look like. She only knew that the lie was finally struggling to breathe. And for the first time since the pool, that felt like hope. The boardroom did not look like a place where lives were changed. It was quiet, polished, climate-controlled, built for decisions that rarely touched the ground. Long glass windows overlooked the academy grounds, the same manicured lawns where the fundraiser had taken place weeks earlier. Sunlight poured in, clean and indifferent, as if nothing ugly had ever happened here. The members of the board sat in a neat row, hands folded, expressions carefully neutral. Lawyers occupied one side of the room, tablets open, pens ready. Administrators filled the back, standing straight, tense smiles fixed in place. The principal sat closest to the board, posture rigid, jaw tight. And then there was Aaliyah. She sat near the end of the long table beside her mother, hands clasped in her lap, spine straight despite the weight pressing against her chest. She wore a simple dress, nothing flashy, nothing apologetic. Her face was calm, but inside her heart beat loud enough to drown out every whisper in the room. Across from her sat Trent Holloway and his parents. Trent leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, confidence carefully reconstructed. His mother sat beside him, hand resting protectively on his knee. His father stared at the table, unreadable. They looked like people who expected inconvenience, not consequence. No one spoke at first. Then the board chair cleared his throat. "We are here to review the incident that occurred at the Academy fundraiser," he said evenly. "Our goal is to understand what happened and determine appropriate action." Appropriate action. The phrase hung in the air, vague and safe. The principal began speaking first. She described the event in smooth, sanitized language, an unfortunate accident, a moment of youthful misjudgment. Staff responded as quickly as possible. Lessons had been learned. As she spoke, Aaliyah felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, anger sharpened by clarity. When the principal finished, the chair nodded. "Thank you, we will now hear from witnesses." A teacher spoke next, then a staff member, each account carefully aligned, each word chosen to minimize responsibility. No one mentioned the shove directly, no one mentioned the delay, no one mentioned fear. Finally, the chair turned toward Aaliyah. "You may speak." The room shifted. Aaliyah stood slowly. She didn't rush, she didn't fidget. She felt her mother's hand brush her wrist, steady and warm. "I was working the event," Aaliyah began. Her voice was clear. "I was carrying trays near the pool." She described what she saw, the way Ethan stood alone, the way the crowd formed, the way Trent moved closer. She spoke without embellishment, without emotion in her tone, letting the facts carry their own weight. "I saw him get pushed," she said. "I saw him fall." Trent scoffed quietly. His mother squeezed his knee. A board member raised a hand. "And you're certain it was intentional?" Yes, Aaliyah replied without hesitation. Why? Aaliyah met his gaze. Because of how it happened and because of what came before it. She described the laughter, the mocking, the way adults watched and didn't intervene. She described the seconds in the water, the panic, the stillness of the crowd. When no one moved, she said, I did. Silence followed. Then Trent's lawyer stood. With all due respect, he said smoothly, this is one perspective, a very emotional one. Aaliyah turned toward him. It wasn't emotional when he was underwater. A murmur rippled through the room. The lawyer smiled thinly. My client has stated repeatedly that it was an accident. That's not true, Aaliyah said, and you know it. Watch your tone, the lawyer replied. Before the board chair could intervene, another voice cut in. Enough. Everyone turned. Richard Whitmore stood at the far end of the room. He hadn't announced himself. He hadn't asked permission. He simply stood, presence commanding, without raising his voice. I think it's time we stopped pretending this is unclear, he said. The principal's face drained of color. Mr. Whitmore, the chair said carefully, we weren't expecting. I know, Richard replied. That's why I'm here. He stepped forward and placed a small device on the table. This is the unedited security footage. A lawyer leaned forward. We've already reviewed. No, Richard interrupted. You reviewed what you were given. He pressed a button. The screen behind the board lit up. The room watched in silence as the footage played. Ethan by the pool, the crowd, Trent stepping closer, the shove. Gasps filled the room. The footage continued. Ethan underwater, the hesitation, adults looking at one another, seconds ticking by. Then Aaliyah running. No one spoke. When the footage ended, the silence was no longer neutral. It was heavy, accusatory, impossible to escape. Richard turned toward the board. This is what happened. He turned toward the principal. This is what you minimized. He turned toward Trent. This is what you did. Trent's face had gone pale. His mother stood abruptly. This is outrageous, she snapped. You're exploiting a child for... Richard raised a hand. Sit down. She froze. Richard's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. My son is autistic, he said. He processes the world differently. What you saw as a joke nearly killed him. Trent swallowed. I didn't mean. You meant to push him, Richard said, and you meant to laugh. The board chair cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, while this footage is concerning, we must consider. My son, Richard said sharply. Consider my son. The door opened. Ethan stepped inside. He walked slowly, carefully, each step deliberate. The room seemed to shrink around him. Richard turned, surprised. Ethan, you don't have to. I want to, Ethan said. His voice was quiet but steady. Aaliyah felt her breath catch. Ethan walked to the table. He didn't look at Trent. He didn't look at the board. He looked at Aaliyah. She smiled gently. He turned back to the room. I was scared, he said. The water was loud. I couldn't move. He paused, fingers pressing together. She came, he said, nodding toward Aaliyah. She didn't wait. Silence stretched. Then Ethan said the words that broke everything open. She saved me. Something cracked in the room. Not glass, not decorum. Illusions. Richard closed his eyes briefly, emotion washing over him unchecked. The board chair exhaled slowly. Thank you, Ethan. Ethan nodded and stepped back. Trent's father finally spoke. We apologize, he said stiffly. This has all been blown out of proportion, but... No, Richard said. This is exactly the proportion. He turned to the board. Effective immediately, I am suspending all funding to this academy. Gasps erupted. Until accountability is taken, Richard continued. Not privately, publicly. The principal's mouth opened, then closed. And, Richard added, my legal team will be reviewing every incident report involving negligence toward disabled students. The board members exchanged looks. Richard turned to Aaliyah. You did what every adult in that courtyard failed to do, he said. You chose courage. He looked back at the room. This meeting is over. No one argued. Outside, the air felt different. Aaliyah stepped into the sunlight. her legs trembling now that the moment had passed. Her mother pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Behind them, administrators scrambled. Lawyers whispered urgently. Phones rang. Inside the building, the system began to collapse under the weight of truth it could no longer deny. Trent stood frozen, surrounded by adults who could no longer protect him. Ethan walked beside his father, hand in hand, lighter somehow. And Aaliyah stood still for a moment, letting it all settle. She hadn't planned to change anything. She had only refused to look away. And that refusal had turned the world. For the first time since the pool, the silence was gone. In its place stood something louder. Truth. And it had finally been heard. The days that followed did not arrive with applause or celebration. They came quietly, carrying consequences that settled into place like pieces of a long-overdue puzzle. The Academy released a formal statement within 48 hours. This time the language was different. Names were named. Responsibility was acknowledged. The incident was no longer described as unfortunate. It was described as a failure. Administrators were placed on leave pending investigation. Policies were suspended, reviewed, rewritten. For the first time, the institution spoke less about reputation and more about harm. Classes were disrupted. Parents demanded meetings. Teachers whispered in hallways, no longer confident in the protection of silence. The system that had once moved smoothly now stumbled, forced to examine itself under a light it had avoided for years. Trent Holloway was removed from campus before the week ended. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting in hallways. Just a quiet dismissal, a locker emptied under supervision, a privilege revoked. His parents issued a statement filled with regretful language and careful distance. Responsibility was acknowledged without sincerity. Consequences, however, remained. For the first time, Trent learned that protection had limits. Ethan returned to school slowly on his own terms. Accommodations were made without argument. Noise levels were adjusted. Teachers received training they had never prioritized before. None of it erased what had happened, but it created space for something new to exist. Trust. Ethan still avoided the pool. That was okay. Healing was not a schedule. His therapist reminded him of that often. What mattered was that he no longer felt invisible. People asked before touching. They waited when he needed time. They listened. Most importantly, his father listened. Richard Whitmore changed in ways that no board meeting could have forced. He began leaving work early. He sat through therapy sessions without distraction. He learned how Ethan communicated comfort and fear. He learned that presence mattered more than provision. One evening they sat together near the water at home. The pool lights glowed softly. Ethan stood a few steps back, calm but alert. "I don't have to go in," Ethan said. "I know," Richard replied. They stayed there side by side until Ethan reached out and dipped his fingers into the water. Just for a moment, just enough. Across town, Aaliyah walked into school on Monday expecting resistance. Instead, she was met with silence of a different kind. Students watched her with something new in their eyes. Respect maybe, curiosity, gratitude. Some looked away, ashamed. Others nodded as she passed. A teacher stopped her after class, voice thick, and said, "Thank you." It wasn't enough, but it mattered. The scholarship committee reached out 2 weeks later. The email was brief, formal, unmistakable, full funding, immediate acceptance, no conditions attached. Aaliyah stared at the screen, then handed the phone to her mother without speaking. Her mother read it once, then again, then covered her mouth with her hand and cried quietly at the kitchen table. This time, the tears were relief. At the end of the semester, a small ceremony was held in the auditorium. No donors, no press, just students, teachers, and families. New policies were announced. A disability advocacy program was introduced. Accountability was addressed without euphemism. When Aaliyah's name was called, the applause was not polite. It was real. She stepped onto the stage, heart pounding, and accepted her recognition with steady hands. She didn't give a speech. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. Ethan watched from the front row beside his father. When she looked at him, he raised his hand in a small wave. She smiled back. That was their language now, simple, honest. Life did not become perfect. Some wounds lingered, some relationships never recovered. Systems changed slowly, imperfectly, but something essential had shifted. A standard had been set. Silence was no longer neutral. Hesitation was no longer acceptable. One afternoon, months later, Aaliyah returned to the academy pool. It was empty, quiet, almost ordinary. She stood at the edge for a moment, remembering the chaos, the fear, the choice she had made without thinking. Ethan joined her a few steps behind. He didn't look at the water right away. "It's different now," he said. She nodded. "Yeah, it is." They stood together, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two people who had survived the same moment from different sides. Above them, the sun reflected softly on the surface of the pool. The water moved gently, no longer hiding what lay beneath. For Aaliyah, the future stretched wide, uncertain but open. She carried the memory of that day not as a burden but as proof that one decision could ripple outward, proof that courage did not require permission. And for everyone who had watched and done nothing, the lesson lingered. Doing the right thing had a cost, but doing nothing had cost far more. In the weeks that followed, conversations continued beyond official meetings. Parents gathered in living rooms. Students organized discussion circles. Difficult questions were asked without immediate answers. People learned how to stay present when discomfort appeared instead of escaping it. The academy partnered with external advocates. Workshops replaced assemblies. Stories replaced statistics. Those who had once dismissed accommodations as inconvenience were required to listen to lived experience. Some resisted, some apologized, some changed quietly without ceremony. Aaliyah began mentoring younger students who reminded her of herself. She never positioned herself as fearless. She spoke honestly about shaking hands, racing thoughts, and the moment fear almost won. That honesty became her strength. Ethan found confidence in unexpected places. He joined a technology club where precision mattered and noise did not. He made friends who respected boundaries without explanation. Slowly, he learned that the world could meet him halfway. Richard volunteered his resources without attaching his name. He funded training programs and accessibility improvements anonymously. When thanked publicly, he redirected credit. This time, influence was used with intention. On the last day of term, Ethan surprised everyone by walking to the pool deck. He did not enter the water. He simply stood there, breathing steadily, unafraid of leaving when he chose. That choice belonged to him now. Aaliyah watched from a distance, pride swelling quietly. They did not speak. They did not need to. The moment belonged to both of them, complete in its simplicity. The bell rang. Students spilled into summer. Life moved forward, imperfect but awake. And somewhere in the quiet left behind, a truth remained clear. Courage is rarely loud, but it echoes. That echo carried beyond the campus, into homes, policies, and private decisions. It lingered in moments when someone chose to speak, intervene, or simply stand beside another human being. The story was no longer about one incident, one hero, or one failure. It became a shared responsibility, a reminder written into memory. Change did not arrive as thunder. It arrived as footsteps, steady and deliberate, moving toward a better direction together. That direction remained fragile, demanding care, courage, and vigilance from everyone involved, every single day forward. Because justice is not a moment, but a practice renewed through action, empathy, and unwavering accountability. Again and again, whenever silence tempts retreat, and whenever humanity demands brave answers, always. Every powerful story leaves behind a lesson that refuses to fade, and this one speaks in a voice both quiet and firm. The first truth is this: silence is never neutral. When people witness injustice and choose comfort over courage, they become part of the harm, even if their hands remain clean. In the story, cruelty did not survive because it was loud. It survived because too many people looked away. Real change began the moment someone decided that staying silent was no longer acceptable. The second lesson is that true courage rarely looks heroic in the moment. It doesn't come with preparation or applause. It appears suddenly, often wrapped in fear, forcing a choice that can't be undone. Aaliyah did not act because she was fearless. She acted because she believed another human life mattered more than her own safety. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action in spite of it. Third, the story reminds us that power does not equal worth. Status, wealth, and influence can protect wrongdoing for a time, but they cannot erase truth. Systems built to serve the powerful eventually crack when exposed to accountability. Meanwhile, those society overlooks, the quiet, the poor, the different, often carry the strongest moral compass, forged by survival and empathy. Another vital message is about healing and responsibility. Justice is not only about punishment, it is about repair. The resolution shows that change means listening, learning, and doing better, again and again. Apologies without action are hollow. Real responsibility reshapes behavior, policies, and priorities. Finally, the story teaches that one decision can ripple far beyond a single moment. A single act of bravery can awaken consciences, rewrite futures, and shift cultures. You may never see all the lives your courage touches, but they matter all the same. The moral is simple, yet demanding. Stand up when it's uncomfortable. Speak when silence feels easier. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Because the world does not change through grand speeches alone. It changes when ordinary people choose to do the right thing, especially when it costs them something. And that choice once made echoes forever.